sevens and nines in most ancient cosmology. So it's a world axis kind of thing again.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we know that plasma likes the numbers 9 and also 7 to a lesser extent is really significant.
Yeah, that's...
And I think we're looking at the key there. There was this kind of staircase in the sky for some time, perhaps a few generations. And this is where the sanctity of those numbers comes from.
Absolutely fascinating. You know, again, I'm drawn back to the idea of, well, we could either talk about, again, the serpent rope of the Mayas, or why not Jacob's ladder of Christian mythology, right?
Obviously, yeah. Philologists have demonstrated that the word used in Hebrew for Jacob's ladder is very similar to an Akkadian word that suggests a tower or a staircase. So the standard opinion is that Jacob's ladder was basically modeled upon the so-called ziggurats, or temple towers of ancient Mesopotamia.
Right.
That's very well possible. That would suggest a link with the Tower of Babel, for instance, Tower of Babylon.
Yeah.
Which also traditionally came in 7 stages. There again, the question is, what were these towers all about? We now know that the Egyptian pyramids were modeled after the archetype of a cosmic mountain. By the same token, you could say that the Babylonian ziggurats were also modeled on the same cosmic mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I'd like it to go. The ziggurats, just like the pyramids in Egypt, were intended to represent a glowing mountain under the pole star that we can now explain as either the zodiacal light or as an auroral phenomenon, something that was really once seen in the sky with great splendor.
You know, I'm thinking about how this actually might have looked, so to speak, when one gazes upon this, all depending on where you are, of course. But do you have any ideas or theories in regards to how close you could be as a human without getting, hurt? Would this be the case, do you think? Any theories about things like this?
It's very hard to say, but one way to test it would be to see just how far the petroglyphs continue.
Yeah.
We've just seen that the petroglyphs appear to indicate that the column came into polar south.
Mm-hmm.
The Earth's south pole. Unfortunately, the landmass in the southern hemisphere towards the South Pole is really very small, so it doesn't really prove much that there aren't many petroglyphs in the southern tip of Argentina, or perhaps, no, in southern Australia, the petroglyphs continue into the south of Australia. I'm not sure if there are any Tasmanian examples.
Mm-hmm.
But as there is no land further south to the South Pole that humans inhabited at the time, we can't tell whether they would have carved there or not.
Yeah.
Certainly, it would be most likely that the plasma was incredibly lethal, especially at times that the axis was at its brightest.
Yeah.
Surely there would have been lots of radiation around, and it would just have been positively dangerous to travel too close. We have a number of Chinese early traveler stories where people set out to travel to the cosmic mountain, and they enter this zone where it becomes really difficult to continue. You get all these liminal zones. You have all these related mythical accounts of if you travel too far to the end of the world or to the center of the earth, it becomes impossible to go there. And only the shamans and the medicine men and the sages have the knowledge and the wisdom to ascend on that column. They know how to deal with it.
Right.
But we as normal people, we can't do that. We'll die. So you need to be immortal. You need to die, in a sense, to be able to get up there. That could also be part of the answer to the question why souls are always associated with the world axis in ancient traditions.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that the traveling of the soul, or even that souls are entering, so to speak, through this ladder or via this ladder.
Yeah, throughout the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance, in mystical traditions, the gateway of the soul, the highway of the soul, is usually the same ladder, rope, staircase thing that is seen as the mechanism by which souls ascend. This begins in Plato's Republic, where Plato describes a vision where the souls go up along a very luminous, what he calls an adamantine column, a column made of diamond. It looks like the rainbow. It's really splendid. And it's positioned directly below the pole, and he sees human souls going up and down there in two directions.
Oh, fascinating.
So, and in shamanism worldwide, it's one of the commonest symbols. What the shaman does when he goes out to find a medicine is to bring himself into a trance and then go up on that invisible column. So he pretends to be climbing a rope or to go up and travel through the heavens and the hells, and there he finds his medicine by speaking to the spirits. So somehow there's a really strong spiritual component to world access lore as well.
Yeah.
Now exactly how that relates to the workings of the human mind is a really difficult, well, it's a very interesting question to answer, but I think it's probably really too early to speculate on this even, because it's such a completely new vista.
Yeah.
What I'm hesitating to say is that the human neural network, the brain and the nervous system, works on electricity, obviously.
Right.
So is it too much to ask if plasma phenomena could also somehow be felt or tap into directly into the human nerve experience?
Ah, now I see what you're getting at.
Very tempting to think so, but it's really speculative, and I don't want to go into too much depth on that at this point.
So I mean, okay, this is a stretch again, but as you say, if this is something that is scalable again that we're talking about, could plasma be something that is actually, well, not occurring in the brain as such, but what I'm getting at here is that this, since we are operating, or the brain is operating on electricity, this could be something that we are actually on one level very connected with, so to speak. If you hear what I'm saying there.
Yeah, which might allow for, especially for hypersensitive people like shamans and visionaries,
right,
who are a bit more spiritual than the others. Perhaps those people, through electromagnetism, have access to some way to still see the world access or somehow still participate in the workings of plasma.
Yeah.
It's quite easy to set up such a hypothesis, but it's quite another thing to make it testable and prove it in science.
Yeah, sure. Exactly.
Tremendous challenge. I'm not sure I will have time for that.
Yeah, there's so much other stuff to kind of sift through.
But it's definitely something we should begin to explore. Yeah. And I know that some of my colleagues at the Thunderbolts group are looking into this.
Really. Wow, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. You know, the idea again of the world tree up here in the Norse, Old Norse mythology. We of course have the Yggdrasil, the world tree.
The Ash Yggdrasil.
Yeah, I guess that this is again we could apply this to the model that we've been talking about, right?
Yeah, Yggdrasil is a typical example of the world tree, with the dragon below, some spectacular bird on top, a squirrel, Ratatosk, running up and down the trunk, a spectacular disruption of the tree at the end of time, Doomsday, Ragnarökr in Icelandic, is also the time when the tree will come loose, and hell breaks loose at the same time. The tree is planted in the center of creation. It has many of the telltale signs of the typical world tree.
Exactly.
So the Yggdrasil is just a great example.
I want to spend a little bit of time actually talking about, we could dive into a little bit of Velikovsky and so forth, but I want to begin talking about Saturn, actually, the Lord of the Rings, as it were. If you have any theories about this planet, as this kind of have been prominently featured in mythology, it seems like, and a few other scholars and researchers have expressed some pretty radical and very interesting, of course, theories when it comes to Saturn, that this actually might have been positioned at some other place in our solar system if we go back X amount of years. Have you found anything in the mythological records that supports or suggests this, you know?
There are two parts to the question, or to the answer. The themes and the motifs that are explained in this way or attached to the planet Saturn, they definitely do exist. There's abundant testimony that there is this character in mythology, this archetypal character, of a ruler and creator of the world who holds everything in his embrace, and the themes associated with the Saturn character in late antiquity.
Mm-hmm.
But the second part of the question is, did those motifs originate with the planet Saturn?
Right.
And it's there that I'm not quite so sure, because the mythology of the planet Saturn and the god Saturn and Kronos in Greek,
right,
arises in Greece really at a fairly late point in time, and we don't really know why these particular traditions were attached to the planet Saturn, because they're actually just worldwide mythical archetypes that could have sprung from other natural objects.
Mm.
But basically, what I'm getting at is the traditional narrative of the succession of kingship as told in Hesiod, where Uranus is the first ruler of heaven. He is emasculated by Kronos and the Titans, and in turn Zeus takes over with the Olympian gods. That whole story is quite an ancient mythical archetype. There is a succession of those gods in heaven. But did they really represent the planet Saturn and Jupiter, or the sky in the original story? I'm not quite so sure, because this is really quite isolated in the world. I don't know of any parallels in the Native Americas, for instance, or in Africa, where you see that a deity of the planet Saturn is followed by a deity of the planet Jupiter, and so on. That seems to be something typically ancient Near East and Greek. It seems to be a Greek invention. What would the invention be based on? I think it's no coincidence that Uranus is the first ruler, the planet Saturn the second, or Kronos the second, and Zeus the third. Obviously, this is the order in which the fixed stars, planet Saturn and the planet Jupiter, appear in space, as known by the ancient Greeks. So Kronos would be, Uranus would be the most venerable, because he's the furthest out. Next comes Saturn, and if you move further inside, next is Jupiter. But that knowledge was only in place since, perhaps since the early first millennium. But in Greece, it's only attested since the 4th century BC. And Hesiod writes perhaps 300 or 400 years earlier the story of the succession of Uranus, Kronos, and Zeus. So I'm not really quite sure whether we're stretching our data too much if you would say that the planet Saturn has a special role in world mythology. So the characters are all there, but the specific associations with those planets, to me, seem quite late in time.
So
when it comes to the traditional Kronos and Zeus narrative.
Right.
It's different, I think, with the planet Venus appearing as a dragon. This is something that is actually really widespread worldwide. We just talked about Quetzalcoatl.
Exactly, yeah.
But you don't have similar parallels to Greek mythology in the Americas or Africa about Kronos and Zeus.
So the idea, I guess it was Velikovsky, if I'm not mistaken, that talked about this idea, potentially that Saturn was closer, or am I wrong there? Do you know?
Yeah, I'm thoroughly familiar with Velikovsky's work, but I admire it to some extent, but I would very much like to emphasize that the work we are presently doing stands completely on its own, and we don't need Velikovsky in any way, to put it bluntly.
Sure.
Basically, we've moved on, and so much has happened in science, there's just no point in going back to 1950, and so, yeah, I would really like to emphasize that we are just working directly from primary data, from primary sources, and we're drawing our conclusions from there. At the same time, though, in fairness, Velikovsky does seem to have been the first person to point towards electromagnetism as a very important factor in our environment to explain ancient traditions. And he does deserve some credit for pioneering those ideas.
Yeah. And he took a lot of heat for it too.
Absolutely, yeah. And partly justified, I'd like to say. I'm not familiar of any peer-reviewed work by Velikovsky, for